So yeah, so welcome. So this is a summit session on CEO and Cisos Roundtable, and we're streaming, right, Patrick?
Yes.
There's a streaming, so we're good. All right, cool. So during this session, we want to just talk about a number of areas in security where the CISOs and the CEOs and the positioning and the thinking and the actions and how we can make everything at least in our worlds more secure and better and create better environments for our companies and economies and societies. So I'm joined by Ante Gulam, which is the CISO of Skyscanner, by Kevin Fielder, which is the CISO of Just Eat, and by Dinis Lopez, which is the CEO of Glasswall. And I guess the first, maybe just going through, and can you just give a very quick intro on sort of where you see the CISO role and your kind of maybe top 3 or 5 areas of concern that you focus on and it keeps you awake at night. Oh wait, you muted, and I think you muted or something.
Oh, your microphone's not plugged in.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't hear Ant. It was working just before.
He'll do it all by mime.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that. Just plug. Yeah, it's just plugged it back in again. Have you tried turning it off and on again? That always works, right?
That always works.
Yeah, I get. You were mentioning a couple of areas that are sort of relevant for my role specifically, right? At least at the moment, it's Skyscanner. So I guess if you look at the CISO role in general, there's a couple of areas that are always relevant, regardless of what you're focusing on in certain points in time. One being translating that sort of strategic view into the more operational, tactical side. There's the whole board level thing and sort of dealing with senior management, which really depends on the business and the company you're in at the moment. And I guess it really depends on the culture and how things are laid out. So I've throughout last couple of roles, that kind of role of a CISO, at least from my perspective, changed significantly from like non-technical at all, where it's all about risks and sort of quantifying risks into a measurable sort of even commercial sense, to, I don't know, being really technical and talking technical things with the board. So I guess one area that requires specific focus on is that strategy, and then justification of that strategy and tracking of the strategy throughout the delivery. So are you actually tackling the things and challenges that you should be tackling, and how do you actually ensure that you are focusing on the right things moving forward? And I think you were mentioning this before, that you would like this sort of session to focus on that as well, right? And how do you actually embed risk management piece into sort of strategic planning, and how do you know that you're actually doing what you should be doing for the business? So I guess there's lots of elements in all that, but I would say those are the things, besides general sort of making sure that the team is motivated and the team is split and sort of adequately and aligned with the rest of the business, and you have the right sort of stakeholder management and engagement models sort of across the board, ability to scale horizontally and vertically. So using, I don't know, security champions to scale horizontally, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the key thing as a CISO for you is actually that translation from strategic to tactical, and actually how do you ensure that you are focusing on what's the most relevant at this point in time for your business? I don't know how you, Kevin, in example at Just Eat, or anyone else does sort of strategic planning and what you actually include in that strategic planning. But I think that's a really interesting area, and we're all doing it in a slightly different way.
Kevin.
Yeah, so it really echo that. I think you often talk about kind of CISO's backgrounds and whether you're a technical CISO or a business CISO. And I think to do well and to be good at a job, you need to be a bit of both. Certainly in a kind of a company that's a techish company, being able to talk to engineers and CTOs and engineering leads, etc., about what you're doing, and even your own team, right? I certainly think my team respects me more if I have a vague idea what they're talking about than if I'm completely non-technical. So I think having a technical knowledge is really important in how you kind of talk to anyone technical, and it helps you understand that side of things so you can translate it to the business side. And then the other side of it is having enough kind of business acumen and understanding of what your organization is trying to achieve, so that you can kind of couch your risk and security language in the language of kind of your business goals when you're talking to execs, boards, people in marketing, whatever else. So I think you definitely need a blend of both. I think the discussion of what's best is an incorrect discussion. I think CISOs should need to have both business and technical knowledge, which is why it's such a broad role, right? It's a hard role to fill because you need such, you can't be one or the other and be super successful, I don't think, or not successful if you've got a bit of both. Certainly what I found from coming from a reasonably technical background is learning the business side of things has been the sort of learning experience for me. And yeah, so in terms of strategic planning, we have kind of a sort of vague 3-year plan. I think anyone who says their 3-year plan's cast in stone is also probably wrong. Nothing tends to stay the same that long, but you have kind of a vague 3-year plan in terms of how mature you want to get, what are the kind of the key big bets you're kind of working on, that kind of thing. Then we have a 12-month plan that's pretty detailed, and then a 3-month plan that's very detailed. So we kind of maintain a rolling 12 months of kind of, this is roughly what we think we're delivering over the 12 months, probably in language like enhanced cloud monitoring or improved authentication, or sort of, fairly broad terms. And as you get into that kind of 3-month horizon, because we're quite an agile company and we kind of have a 3-month planning horizon across kind of security and tech and things, that's when it gets much more detailed and you start looking at kind of what you're going to deliver each and kind of sort of put stakes in the sand effectively about what you're going to achieve. And then as a team we work in an agile manner, so we're completely sprint based, so then the team break down that work into sprints for sort of what they're doing every couple of weeks. So we kind of have that right sort of sprint, everything from the sort of this 2-week sprint is what we're delivering, right out to kind of roughly what we can deliver over the year, and then the kind of longer term kind of maturity sort of discussions at the kind of board and audit committee level. So kind of a bit of everything. We do everything. We have I've been lucky enough to get a delivery manager full-time for my team from our kind of PMO delivery organization, who helps us make that look awesome. So she translates that all into and helps the team translate that all into business plan, and she's been doing kind of like agile coaching and that kind of thing with the team as well, to kind of improve how we work and improve our retrospectives and ability to kind of keep that continuous improvement cycle. So that's really helpful. I think if you have a moderate sized security team, definitely see if you can get some PMO/delivery management support there, because the amount of support you'll get from your organization when you say, this is exactly what we're delivering for you next quarter, this is what we delivered for you last quarter, and these are, we said we'd do 18 things, we delivered 16, these are 2 things we missed, this is why, this is what we're doing next quarter. The amount of trust you get from demonstrating that and having that proof that you're doing what you say you're doing really has really improved the support I get. So I fought against it a little bit, because we had a bit of that kind of the security team knows what we're doing, right? So we know what we're doing. Why are you challenging us? Why do you need to kind of know all detail? Because we know, but fundamentally they need to understand that. So kind of I've really learned that actually getting the stuff out in a language and a format that people outside of your team understand better really helps you get support from people outside your team. And then, as Ante says, things like security champions, doing brown bags, sitting, if your organization has guilds, getting involved in kind of architecture guilds and QA guilds and things, to kind of spread that, force multiply what your team can do by getting other people bought into your mission is really helpful. Sorry, a bit of a long answer, but I think there's quite a lot to it.
That's great. Actually, can I cue Danny on that one, which is from your side, what's your views on that visibility and that almost, intersection between, deep technical understanding of what's going on, but also the translation from a business point of view, and that ability to be on the receiving end of detailed plans and what's happening and what's not happening.
Yeah, I mean, I think I was actually going to ask a question back to to Kevin, but let me just a couple of comments first. So, by the way, sorry for joining a little bit late. I had some broadband issues as my eldest was essentially consuming my broadband entitlement for her Zoom classes. Is the way I would look at it. But I work with Dinis at Glasswall, and I think, look, I agree with everything you've said. I think that what's interesting is, in a way, you guys play such a crucial role, because you have, as you were saying, Kevin, you need to have the technical depth to be able to work very closely with your teams to, yes, set strategy, but work work on all the tactical piece. But then there's a big education exercise, I think, with the rest of leadership teams in organizations and boards. And it's the point I was going to make, that I think that I'd be interested in your views, but I think more and more leadership teams, I think, have stepped up the curve very quickly over the last few years. But sometimes, I think there is some sort of wide discrepancy amongst overall boards in organizations as to how important security really is. So I think, we talk a lot about the headline of, security really has hit the boardroom agenda now. But I think that, whether it's large organizations or medium-sized organizations, there's a real disparity in that. And I think part of the sort of overall strategic challenge is really bringing security to the board. And I just wondered how you saw that, and the difference between dealing with, as I say, with overall leadership teams and overall boards on the importance of security, and and indeed whether you've seen change over the last few years.
Yes, I think it's definitely more and more of a topic people are interested in. I think there's often in organisations, talking generally, not mine specifically, there is a bit of a maybe disconnect or dichotomy, I don't know what the right word is, between
Ooh, I think we lost you, Kevin.
Broadband issues.
Yeah.
All these kids using up our broadband.
Now we're hanging. It's between what?
Cannot use anything.
See, they're always falling asleep mid-sentence.
Exactly. All right, Kevin. All right, Ant, do you wanna pick that up?
Yeah, sure. I guess so. Danny, if I got that correctly, you were saying, have we noticed any change over time recently in sort of how you deal with the board, and is it more frequently like part of the agenda, and do boards see security as a more and more sort of important thing than they used to before, or was it more on the line of, is it more technical versus non-technical? I think it was.
No, I think it's more, I mean, look, every board is going to tell you that security is high up in the agenda.
Yeah,
right? I mean,
absolutely.
That's just a given. But the reality is that there's a big difference between saying that and actually spending the necessarily amount of time to kind of bring those items to the agenda, to actually challenge in the right way, all that sort of thing. And I think for me it's more there's a difference between a board and an executive team on security, and I raise it because I think it's relevant, and I think it's part of the challenge for a lot of companies. And it was more because of of how you guys operate, whether you've seen change, and indeed how we do something about that to sort of increase.
To be honest with you, I've seen more of a change from business to business based on the culture rather than purely as an industry trend or some. But there's definitely, obviously, as there's more and more incidents and there's more and more publicly exposed stuff, that there's more sort of buzz around security. So I think that always, and more or less in every single industry. I mean, for Skyscanner, if you look at travel, like just look at past 6 months or 12 months, you've had EasyJet, BA. You have so many different breaches. So obviously all of these things do influence everyone's sort of view. So it's definitely easier to get things on the agenda and to push for things when you have all of this happening around you, because you can't just close your eyes and ignore it, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I've been using to drive some of the initiatives is actually using examples across the industry and just in general, and putting ourselves into those sort of businesses' shoes and trying to run those scenarios and say, look, we need to invest in this area because obviously trends and developments are moving in that direction. But yeah, to answer your question, I think the short answer is yes. Like there's definitely sort of more and more sort of security aware boards and sort of senior management sort of layers in general across different industries. But I would say that's primarily because of all the privacy changes that happened recently, GDPR kicking in, obviously bigger fines, et cetera, but also because of the media, and obviously everyone's talking about security and it's all over the place. Like you go to any portal, you're going to read about the breach, not today, then tomorrow. So yeah, I think that's definitely that. I think one thing that's really important is to how do you take all this information and actually translate it into something that's relevant for you as a business? So how do you create your own kind of, not just a threat profile, but like model that you can consume this information and actually turn all that into something useful for you? Because one thing is just to get a budget, but as I was saying earlier, it's really important to understand how do you organize work so you invest, but at the same in the right thing at the right time. But at the same time, as Kevin was saying, you need to stay always flexible enough because things are changing so fast that what you plan to do today maybe is completely relevant tomorrow, and you need to reprioritize and completely shift focus. So I think that's one of the biggest challenges. And for the board itself, I think regardless of how technical people are, I think at the end of the day, it's all about the risk. Right, everything's about the risk at that level. So the way how you're going to translate that and how you're going to explain that risk, how you're going to quantify it, but at the end of the day, any enablement function, which security definitely is, like legal and finance, it's all about risk, right? And what are the consequences of doing versus not doing something?
Looks like Kevin's back.
Yeah, but I think he needs to pop into the door so we have a question, so we can go with this question, and maybe Danny, you can start with this one too. So in your experience, what does a board care from the CISO? So what does the board wants to see from the kind of the security side of things?
Yeah, I think it's I mean, to Ante's point, I think the risk piece is high up on every board member's agenda. I mean, it's going to be sort of front of mind when you mention the word security. So that's going to be leading. But I do think it's a little bit like when you're talking to let's say an SME who is vulnerable, who doesn't really understand much about how to secure their business. I think the worst thing is to be then sort of start the conversation with the sort of fear factor behind what's going to happen if they don't have the right sort of array of solutions. And when you start with fear, then you tend to have people in the wrong place. And I think that it's in a way it's similar with boards where to Ante's point, of course, it's all about risk management of that risk mitigation, and making sure that ultimately, from a reputational point of view, you're doing absolutely everything you can and should to be able to hit that agenda. But I think then there's a sort of wider piece around getting boards to understand the importance of a security culture. What that means in terms of the overall efficiency of the organization, what that means in terms of the actual impact on the company's culture, how they can play a role in that, how they can become advocates, and so so trying to really highlight the positives and the sort of enabling factors that will be good for business is important, because if you focus it all on the sort of potential doomsday scenario, then I think board members can sort of associate your role with something that they just feel very nervous about. Whereas if you can also really emphasize all of the positives behind all the work that you do, then you get them in the right place. I mean, I kind of stating the obvious, but I think that this is sort of big cultural piece there.
Kevin, do you want to chip in?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the leading with fear and kind of thing is the totally the wrong thing to do. It's much more for me how understanding the kind of risk appetite of the business, because every business has a risk appetite, and what that is, and then trying to couch your security language and what you want from security in how you help achieve that risk appetite safely, how you help the business move fast and securely, those kind of things. So it's how do you be an enabling function for the business? And so the one or two times when you do have to sort of push back on something because it really is terrible, people listen because you're seen as an enabler and a helper who doesn't run around talking about the world's on fire and how bad things are and using other breaches or whatever else as fear. So I think it's how do you become a partner to the business to help us do things safely and build trust, so we're a trusted brand, as opposed to how do you use fear to get things done. So yeah, completely agree with Daniel on that one. I think what I was trying to say just before I got disconnected, I also think sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect or dichotomy between kind of CEOs and boards in terms of what they say and then the actions that happen. So you very rarely get a board or whatever that says we'll take security risks. People don't ever want to say that. But then when there's often, as we know, when there's a choice between getting a new product out versus
we're getting Kevin's answer in bits.
This is such a way of creating expectation around answers.
Yeah.
Why does he always get stuck in the same position?
I think that's a button you press. Go. Oh, okay. I freeze now.
Question to Dinis, so we can might be Dinis. You can raise that.
Yeah. So what we got? Kevin stuck again. So question is with my yeah. So with experience in IT and security, boards usually are looking at InfoSec and IT as an overhead to any business, and some boards are might not be keen on investing. Have you seen this changing in the last couple of years across boards from different companies and business you work with? And I think Ante, you can have a go at that. So have you felt a change in the last couple of years on the willingness to invest in security?
I think we touched on that earlier, right? Purely because there's more and more data and information being shared publicly about breaches, and more people are actually talking about security in general. I think the short answer is yes. Now, how does that reflect to different industries and different businesses? I think it really depends. It's not. I think it's more related to actual sort of industries and sort of different cultures rather than sort of over time with 3 years. As I said, short answer is yes, purely because there's just much more going on and much more sort of cyber attacks, threat actors that are targeting more and more interesting sort of businesses. So just on the back of that, things are definitely sort of growing in that sense, and that means that there is definitely more investment. If you look at all the researchers lately and trends, things are going up and more businesses are definitely investing. Now, I guess the interesting question is, how willing are they to actually invest in this, and are they investing in this just for the sake of investing and saying, okay, we should definitely do something, or do they actually know how does this tackles the challenge that they have specifically? Now, how many of these businesses that are investing more actually know, okay, we're doing this because of this and that. We're not doing this because trends are showing we should do something about it. So I think, how do you channelize that sort of good intention and definitely more willingness to invest more in cybersecurity in general as a function and as a discipline into something tangible that will actually increase the security posture of your business and strategically help you sort of to deter threats. I think that's something that is more interesting than actually just throwing money at the problem, because I don't think that's going to solve a problem, to be honest.
I think just one quick thing to add, which is interesting, is the you talk just sort of also looking at this question. When you think about CEOs, it would have been impossible just a few years ago to think that CMOs, chief marketing officers, would become the CEO of a company. I mean, just let's say, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, you didn't really see CMOs, join an executive team, and then their next jump was CEO, because the CMO, why would the CMO sort of qualify to become the CEO? Just like the CFO, that took some time too, right? The CFO wasn't supposed, isn't the CFO supposed to be the numbers person? So, why would the CFO become the CEO? And I think that, in time, and I don't know what the ratio is, but how many CISOs become the CEO of a company? And the number is probably quite low at the moment. But I would say that part of the sort of answer to a lot of the issues that we're talking about, the kind of the test will be when we start see that happening, because there is no reason why a CISO should not become the CEO of a company. The CISO will probably have to increase in kind of the strategic overview that they have of the business. They'll there'll be enhanced qualities and skills that will come with that transition, et cetera, et cetera. But I go back to my CMO example. There was for years, you basically have, whether it was a leadership team discussion or a board discussion, and then item number 6 would be marketing, let's ask the CMO to kind of, give us the quick 30-minute update on marketing. Okay, thank you very much for that. Now we'll move on. That's changed. Lots of CMOs are CEOs. And I think, so my point is that, security and the importance of it, the more it becomes, that sort of, yes, as we've said, an enabler, the strategic discussion. Every member of an executive team has security at the heart of whatever business function they're leading, will kind of evolve into that world. And I think that, we're not there yet, but in years to come, that's what's going to happen.
Try Kevin again.
Hey, yeah, I'm back. I'm on my phone this time. My laptop seems to keep losing connection for some reason. Yeah, no. So I think, yeah, that's I think definitely it's awesome. And we're definitely seeing that there is a improved and ongoing increase in the interest in security within organisations, certainly at sort of board and exec level. The only thing I was saying, which I don't know how far I got, was sometimes there is a bit of a disconnect between what people say and what they do, in terms of no CEO or board will ever say we accept security risk or we take security risk. So, no one's going to come out and say that. But if you're in a competitive landscape, and quite rightly so, if there's a choice between fixing a security issue and releasing a new product or going into a new region that is critical for your organization's success, you're going to do the product or the organizational change that's required to succeed, because without an organization being there, there's nothing to secure. I guess it's similar to with the COVID stuff, right? When everyone worked from home, a lot of organizations would have taken an awful lot of risk to get people working from home. If they work from home or we don't exist, we can't function. So the organizations will take potentially quite high levels of risk at certain times to achieve goals and to succeed and to stay in the market. Otherwise, they may not exist. But I think very rarely would a board or your kind of annual report state that where it makes sense to, we will take quite high risk. So you'll often get messages and annual reports and things that make statements around having a very low tolerance for risk and not taking risks and taking security very seriously. But then when the rubber hits the road and it's a critical business decision and a critical new product or whatever, security corners maybe, maybe wrong word, or security may be put off until post-launch or to a later date as they accept risk for a while. And I think a big part of our job in that situation is making sure people the risk they're accepting. That is something that full knowledge. I just find it quite an interesting topic. I find it really interesting. I think that it's definitely very much more a topic people talk about, and definitely people are moving in the direction that Danny spoke about. But I also think that for a business where your business is achieving X and succeeding and beating competitors will very often be above fixing the current security issue for a certain period, because you have to succeed as a business. Security baked into those conversations, and the more it becomes part of what you do, the less that becomes an issue. But I think it is still an issue currently.
So we had a really good question here from Katrin Buller. Could you share some stories of board meetings where you had success? Sorry, yeah, you got the name wrong. Okay, so the question is, can you share some stories of board meetings where you had success and where you didn't have success? Some tools, analysis, KPIs, framework stuff where you presented that actually work and where you didn't work.
Dinis, you're ideally suited to answer that.
Yeah, let's put Dinis on the hot seat for a minute.
So one of the things I have to say that I highly recommend, which I know it will be hard to do, is for the CISO to also control technology and engineering. I found that in my role now is very interesting, because I'm both leading engineering and both leading security. So I find that I have some very interesting conversations with myself that in the past were much more difficult, where I'm able to basically push a lot of changes and almost drive security from an operational point of view in ways that I kind of struggle in the past. And actually what it means that the conversation I then tend to have with the executives on security are actually very aligned with what we want to do as a business. Although, we are a security vendor, so we have to be secure in a number of areas we do, but also there's a very direct alignment between the work that the team is doing from a security point of view and the work that we need to do from a product point of view. And I find that I'm actually able to use, in a way, my security skills a lot also on the way that the product is developed, the way the product is marketed, the way that we hit the market, the way we understand how it goes. And also I kind of also using the fact that, from a budget point of view and a team point of view, I'm kind of making the case that, hey, we need to really have a really good security team because, hey, we security, what we do, but also that has a very nice halo effect because I actually probably get more resources for security than an equivalent SME of this size. And I would say that from a kind of board point of view, the thing that I feel is very important, I always found quite powerful, is to really not pass the myth of security, not sugarcoat things, right? To be very clear on where we are and very, very clear on the kind of attackers that are hitting you. And the fact that, we here to prevent crisis, right? I'm very big fan of amplifying incidents so we can actually use incidents to address issues and to provide that visibility to the business on what is actually going on in the company and what are the risks that we have hitting us, but also to be able to translate that to say, look, you can see that in that area we need to be much better because we got lucky in these particular situations. But I highly recommend security to kind of be able to have a very strong voice on engineering, and actually that path from CISO to CEO, although it's probably one that I'm not sure I want to take, but I can see that as security becomes a lot more critical and the CISO becomes a lot more an enabler to the business, which I feel, especially if you look at Kevin and Ante, they really represent that generation of CISOs that really focus on enabling the business, empowering the business, understanding how the business works. I feel that we're becoming a lot more trusted party to drive a lot of change. And if you look at that scope, yes, a natural path is to have a much bigger voice. And I always felt that the CISO should have a seat at the board, not because of fear, not because the board is worried about security, because the board is worried about tons of other things, right? Security just happens to be one of them. I actually feel that security should be at a table because we are the only organization in the whole company that touches everything. We have access to all the data points. We can provide visibility and guidance to the business at the strategic level that very few other organizations can do. And in fact, the CFO probably has equivalent data sets or some of the data sets because CFO has access to a lot of the financial data, but he doesn't have the richness of the data and the context that security has.
What about examples where that hasn't worked as well as that? Just sort of as an overall theme.
I think is where, when Kevin and Ant was saying, it's very important to have a very clear, sort of delivery. And I really like, your delivery manager, Kevin. I'm absolutely gonna steal that one because I'm also been very big fan of operations. I kind of invested heavily on my teams on the operations and delivery. And I think that's definitely a case where, it's very important that, when you kind of commit to certain things or when you kind of want to present a vision for where you want to go, that then you kind of go back and execute. And one area I feel I haven't succeeded as much as I wanted is that translation that Ant was talking about, which is how do you translate the risk and the strategy and the risk mitigation that you are doing with something that is understood and visualized and almost actionable by the board. I feel I'm coming close. I'm coming with the graph data, with the connections. There's still a air gap that with that connection between that and the dashboards that we actually able to present or the guidance that we're able to present to the business, which is where I think maps are so powerful, which we'll get there.
I guess short answer from my side. One thing that always works, simplicity. One thing that never works, complexity. Like just simplify. The level of seniority. If you look at that chart with complexity and level of seniority, like as there's more seniority in the room, the level of complexity needs to exponentially come down. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. So, I mean, simplification is the hardest thing to do always, but you just need to try and find a way how to simplify as much as possible. That's why I was talking about risks, Danny, before, because that's the way that it's easiest, like to explain certain things that are extremely complex for most of the people usually. So going into threats and like different things and models that we can create and we are creating on a regular basis just usually doesn't work. I think one other thing that's really important is start light and build on top of that. Don't go like heavy and then reduce from it. I found that working quite well, because usually what you need to do with really senior people is reverse engineer what they need. They will never tell you we need this because they don't know. So what you need to do is reverse engineer what someone needs from you. And to do that, you need to be patient, but it's much better to start light than to start with tons of things and then rip everything apart and figure it out that way. So yeah, but I guess it's an interesting one. And again, I would say it really depends on an environment and culture and how things operate within the business.
So I guess the only thing I'd add to that is prep. So there isn't a one size fits all answer. You know, there isn't a framework that all boards will like or a reporting format all boards will like. But you know, and to hit nail on the head with kind of keep things simple. The other one is for me is prep and try and get some pre-meets. So the most successful and moment I had, I think, in our audit committee was prior to my first kind of meeting with them. I had some kind of pre-meets and the lady who was kind of head of the audit committee kind of gave me some time to kind of go through what she wanted to see, what she wanted in the pack. I took her through the kind of security philosophy and strategy, and you know why being an agile organization we were focusing on kind of detect and respond first rather than prevent, because we didn't want to kind of block things that were important in a fast moving organization until we really understood it, those kind of things. Took her through all that, got her to understand why we were doing things a bit differently to kind of what auditors might normally ask for. Then in the audit committee meeting, she was like, we started going through the few slides I had, and then she was like, oh, Kevin, you took me through these really good concepts about why you're doing things in your philosophy. I thought it was great. Perhaps you could take everyone else through it. So I basically had the head of the audit committee say, what you're doing is great, tell everyone else about it. And that was a huge success. I mean, you might not always get that much support, but you always want to kind of have a few supporters or kind of people on your side in the room. So I can't kind of overemphasize that kind of pre-work thing. If you get 2 or 3 people in the room that you've taken through your deck that have told you what they want to hear, and to Ante's point, maybe you've had to tease it out a little bit. You've got them understanding what you're trying to message. You've made sure your presentation hits the points they want. You've got some support in the room already. So do that prep work, put the time in, chase them up to get some time with key people in the room before you go into the meeting. That way, you know, you're kind of hitting that nail on the head without having to kind of go in and just hope it's all okay.
Yeah, I have to say that I had that experience too. I found that in the first board meetings, I kind of thought that that's where the decision was going to happen. And what I've learned was that the decision happens in all the pre-meetings and all the preparations that you do before you get there. In fact, I heard this really great comment to say, don't think that the board acts as an Uber CEO, because it's also a bit weird, right? Because that's the point of the CEO, is to make a lot of those calls. The board has to be in agreement, but by the time you hit the board, if you've done exactly those pre-meetings, like you said, and especially if you have an exec team that's supporting you, there's a lot of decisions that actually get made in those pre-meetings that by the time you get to the board, you should all be aligned with what you want to do. So can I move this now to team structure? Because I think this is very important, and also because both of you have quite, is for agile, maybe not the right word, but quite accelerated teams that you guys have to deal with, right? How do you embed security in those things, and how do you keep almost that alignment of, because I believe, Ant, you have hundreds of squads, right? And Kevin, you also have quite a distributed organization, right? How do you manage that, at both the senior level, because they kind of created that structure, and then when you're actually working with the teams themselves, when you have hundreds of squads doing stuff, how do you scale that up and you connect those dots?
Yeah, there's no simple answer to that. I guess Skyscanner is even more specific, because for a long period of time, we used to change our org structure dynamically. So we used to do plannings, and then after planning, we would just restructure how we operate. So we would redefine tribes and squads. So that makes things even more interesting, because if you tie anything to the org structure or to specific teams, you're going to fail, because these things do change. So you need to look at it as a variable rather than something that's always there. So I think, to answer your question, how do you keep the alignment? there's a couple of things that we've learned. So one thing that we're really good at as a team is, and I think as an engineering discipline as well within the business, is just experimentation. We tend to experiment a lot with everything, from product related things to internal sort of culture related things. If we are not sure if something's going to work, we just try it. Let's give it a go for a month and see if it works. We collect a lot of learnings and we make a decision. And we tend to have that turnaround happen quite quickly, which is really, really helpful, because otherwise it will be a nightmare to figure out what to do. So from the engagement model perspective, so we do have hundreds of squads across engineering that we need to sort of deal with, and non-engineering. And we are responsible for their output, obviously, in a way, or at least accountable from a security perspective. So we spoke about champions and sort of having sort of people at that level to scale horizontally. But at the same time, that alignment actually comes from many different approaches. I think we use OKRs. So we use OKRs purely for that purpose, for alignment. We use it to be able to ensure that we do dependencies well. We do joint plannings, and then we can actually commit to each other as teams who's going to do what, and that we all embed that into our plans for that quarter. Before we started doing OKRs, it was quite difficult to get sort of engineering time in that sense and get sort of commitment on certain things, because we are changing so much, and pace is sometimes insane. So it's really hard to ensure that you have all of that aligned from a delivery perspective. And I like what Kevin was saying, that you need delivery people. We do have sort of company-wide lean ops sort of people that do this role across the board. But I think before you can actually ensure the alignment, I think the key is just, and I think Kevin touched on that as well, is with visibility. Like, first thing you need to do is understand what's actually going on before you can do anything. So I think we invested a lot into automation and sort of in just investigations around principles and practices and procedures and tooling and technology, everything, what's going on, how do different bits work, and what's going on. So we developed a lot of in-house tooling to get that baseline visibility, and then we built on top of that to ensure that we are more or less consistent, aligned across the board. One big thing, whenever you have tribes and squads, you don't need to be utilizing these Spotify model as such, but as long as you have fully autonomous cross-functional feature teams, you're going to end up having silos in one way or the other. And that obviously leads towards the potential lack of consistency. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges that most of the tech businesses have these days. How do you ensure alignment between different, not even functions, but just different teams from any enablement function? Like, let's say you have a library that you want everyone to reuse. How do you ensure that everyone's using it? So I think those things, when it gets to alignment, those are operational things, are even more important than the strategic alignment. Strategic alignment is more or less okay as long as you have a senior management buy-in and you do like joint plannings and you do OKRs or any other sort of goal planning well. So if you have a portfolio Kanban or whatever you do for the planning, I think alignment is less of an issue. I think what's more of an issue is actual tactical delivery of that, and how do you ensure that, number one, people do have time to do security stuff, and number two, how do you ensure that that you have that level of consistency across the board? So one thing we did, in example, is engineering health initiative, where obviously we're not Google, so Google can allocate 50 teams or 100 teams and call them refactoring teams and send them to refactor and rewrite Python 2 to Python 3 across the board. So majority of businesses can't afford that, right? So how are you getting rid of that tech? That would be interesting to have that discussion. And how do you ensure that people always have time that, besides feature work and product related work, can actually do other stuff like getting rid of tech debt or doing security stuff? So we have this sort of engineering health, which forms 25% of each team's backlog, and every sprint you need to be spending 25% of your time actually doing security, stability, availability, or scalability related work. And I think those things are important because those things happen at high level and they propagate. And that's where you need to make sure you have that engagement more than, because if you don't do it at that level, you're always going to go down to engineering teams and ask them to fix stuff for you. Which, again, I'm not saying you cannot make that work through gamification as we did and through real-time feedback loops, etc. But you're always going to be one step behind. So I think that sort of ensuring that it's clear why certain things have to be done, why things are relevant, and then just making sure you have that consistency is really important.
Anything to add, Kevin?
Yes, so we do similar stuff to that. So we try and have a certain portion of engineers' time is for kind of hygiene factors. So whether that's tech debt, security, whatever. So a portion of that is I don't think it's perfect, but in theory is put aside for people to fix stuff. We've gone down a similar gamification route. So obviously we automate as much as we can of kind of security checking in terms of SAS, DAS, those kind of things. So we have as much stuff in the pipeline as we can, both for actual code and also the state of kind of machine and container images. So they all get scanned as part of that, and we use kind of approved images, those sort of things. And we then have actually, luckily, we piggybacked on what our SRE team built. So we've got a scorecard. So most of our components have a score and in the scorecard, and they get effectively scores A to F across multiple dimensions, one of which is security. So there's a kind of a internally public site where all of the components are, and your component scores across things like I think there's like testing and the scalability and there's security. They all have scores in that. So, and I own what sits underneath that security thing. So you've obviously got the ability to kind of tailor behavior slightly by choosing what weighting certain things get. So if we're finding there's a lot of, for example, there was a lot of overwasp issues, we might make the
We lost Kevin.
SAST component
Oh,
overly high. But you've lost me again?
No, just a little bit. No, you're back again. You're good. You're saying a lot of OWASP issues.
I'm back.
Yeah, you're back. So if you say,
say for example, if you saw a lot of OWASP, say for example, you saw quite a lot of OWASP issues, you might make the SAST score a really high component of the security score. Or for example, if you saw a lot of AMI age issues, you might make the AMI part a high part of the security score. So you can't change that every week, but over months, you can kind of change what your priorities are to change people's behavior based on the scorecard. You've all paused, so I might have gone again.
No, you're good. How high does that information get from a business point of view? An exec.
Hello. Oh, hang on 1 second.
Sorry.
Meantime, can I ask a question? Before there was mentioned about 25% allocation for security in each sprint backlog, and that teams were then solving technical debt. Is it really effective? Because we tried at least 1-2 years, and all the time we got complaints from the team members that they are not able to focus. They need at least one sprint to deliver something, because just 25% each sprint not bringing them anything, and they cannot do anything with that, just either full sprint or nothing. Is it really working for your company?
I can talk about, at Skyscanner, it's working really well. And I guess the reason why that's the case is because it's aligned across different sort of levels, and it's been one unified initiative. So it really depends how much autonomy you give to people, and can they actually decide what they're going to do that in those 25% of the time? Can they try and tackle any challenges, or are there any high level initiatives that should be prioritized? So I think those are the key things that I've seen potentially being a challenge. So what we do, we have a strategic engineering backlog, and that splits into chunks. We have lean ops people sort of doing that in an agile way on a strategic sort of level, and then that splits into chunks that goes into Eng health backlogs for actual teams. So that makes it like deliverable, but at the same time measurable. And it's not one thing that is really relevant. I think also is the alignment with product. So you do need support from product. So every PO in every single tribe or squad needs to kind of be aware of that and help them manage that. Another thing is who is accountable for that portion of the backlog. So is that the team that is delivering it? Is it someone else? So in our case, we have sort of principal ICs. We call them principal ICs because they're principal engineers at individual contributor at the level that is not really within the team, but rather floating between teams, and they're actually accountable for that backlog. So they're quite senior. They understand the technology usually better than more junior people, and they actually help teams to focus and deliver. So that also made a difference for us, rather than just allocate the time for something and just give it to teams and let them decide what they want to do. That is kind of hard to expect to succeed in a way that there's consistency across the board.
The other thing there is the fact that it's important to understand that security, quality, reliability, they're not one-off exercises. So I'll be very wary of the idea that just give us a sprint to do something, because what happens on the early other sprints. And that's also the kind of thing that actually from at least an exec, probably not board, but from an exec point of view, you want the support that Ante is talking about, right? You want this support to basically realize that, you know, if from an exec point of view, you push too much on features, you push too much on just get it done, ship it out, you're buying a huge amount of problems that will come back to you. So eventually things slow down quite dramatically. And I kind of see that, you know, the thing that Skyscanner is doing really well is bake that culture of experimentation, which is basically a culture of driving change through the business, and then allows, you know, almost the success to replicate itself. Because once you can experiment and it works well, then you can replicate across the board.
Yeah, because there is always this conflict. Yes, you want to see the features, and security is something in the backend. So you won't deliver to customer, and you need to persuade business owner that they should invest also implementing. One thing is finding security issues, the other persuade to implement that. So this conflict.
So on the topic of team structures, and also take into account that also something, Danny, you mentioned on your keynote, which is the talent pool and the skills gaps and bringing more resources in. Can maybe, you know, I think Kevin, I'm not sure is on at the moment, but and can you talk a little bit, and then Danny continue on the sort of the culture and how to attract the talent and make sure that you get the soft skills required. And I think in technology we do have a big problem of diversity and trying to recruit, you know, a much more diverse sort of workforce. Do you also find that the fact that we're now much more open to remote working or working from other places created by the isolation economy, right? Is that going to help in creating those teams and attracting that talent?
Yeah. I don't know, to be honest, is a fair answer. I don't know if that's going to help. I think, and at Skyscanner, one thing that's really helpful is that we're always able to tag along with other company-wide initiatives. And I think Skyscanner has been doing these things extremely well for quite some time now. So I think it's really hard to drive initiatives like that as a single team or as a single discipline within the business. So when you say, how do you attract talent, how do you do this? I think these are much higher level initiatives that you need to kind of become a part of or try and influence and drive in a certain direction if you want, but it has to be like a company-wide thing. Otherwise it's really hard. I know we spoke in sort of, I don't think last year, but a couple of years back, actually at the summit, when we were on site, we spoke about the same topic, right? And we spoke about talent attraction and inclusion and diversity and how do we do these things. So one thing that Skyscanner does really well is that sort of integration with different universities and getting sort of really good graduates programs in place where we get interns and graduates from some of the best universities in the UK, and I see that as a huge value for us. That's one of the ways how we get some of the best talent in, basically. On the inclusion and the diversity specifically, again, I think we can definitely do more on that, and we can always get better at it, but it's really hard to do that as a single function or as a single team within the business. You just need a really high level business initiative to do that. So I know we've actually hired people to focus solely on that at Skyscanner and are driving that high level initiative that we're basically now part of as a function and as a discipline. But yeah, obviously the advice is, if you're not doing it and not paying attention to it, yeah, it's to start doing it as a business, or if you're just part of the function, try and drive that or influence it so it does actually get to people's radar, because obviously it is one of the challenges that we have today.
I mean, just a couple of things to add, because I agree with everything you've said. I think that, you know, COVID and what's going on right now does have an impact in the sense that it's, you know, in our space, we all knew we could work effectively remotely, or you know, we thought we could, but the reality is that it's proven that we really can, and that's across the sector. I think from a talent perspective, that means that we are now looking at a much bigger pool, because, you know, I think more and more, you know, some companies are more advanced in this than others, but, you know, more and more we are very comfortable with blending a, you know, kind of full-time employee model with a freelance model. We are more comfortable in having people contribute to the company who are based, you know, not necessarily are not coming into the office, but they might, you know, be based in other countries. And I think that with that level of flexibility, then what you get, you know, you get two things happening. One is you can, you know, your pool is much larger, so that's great. But the second one is that the competition is much bigger too, because, you know, if there are more people out there, there are also way more employers out there who are all over the place who can also try and attract those, you know, that key talent. So I see it as a positive, but I think it sort of comes back to, when it comes to hiring talent, it's not about, you know, having an HR strategy or an HR policy about how to do X, Y, and Z. It's about communicating, you know, the tone and values of your company day in, day out, so that people genuinely want to join your company. You know, I think we're moving away from that whole environment where you're applying for a job and, you know, you read up on the company for 5 minutes before you have your first interview to be able to, you know, sound like you know a little bit about them, and then you kind of have a conversation and see where it goes. I think, you know, we really are now in a world where you're tracking companies, you know, you're pretty close to the voice that company has, because you follow them on LinkedIn and you follow them on Twitter, and you might follow some key people in the company, etc. And you get a real sense of what that company stands for, and then you want to join them. You know, you're not part of that company because you need to be part of the company, because actually you have choice too. You're part of the company because you really want to be part of that company. So I think it's sort of, you know, there is a very important element here, which is building the right culture, and working hard to keep that culture alive, communicate it in the right way, and then use that as a way to be able to attract talent.
So here's a good question. What's your opinion about hiring people into the security team without a computer science bachelor degrees?
I mean, I'm going to answer that one. I'm a huge believer that, you know, passion is just as important as you know, what somebody might have or might not have studied when they did their undergrad. Before I even answer the question, I did economics as my bachelor's, and the only reason why I did economics is because I was one of those people who at the time I just didn't really know what else I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to go into the business world. I knew I wanted to be in a commercial environment, and, you know, economics seemed like the right thing. I think that, you know, choosing a path on the back of an undergrad degree is very dangerous territory. You know, we are more and more in an environment where non-linear careers are actually, you know, something that is not just accepted but really respected, and non-linear careers bring with them a whole bunch of, you know, whether it's soft skills or other skills that ends up being, you know, extremely important for any discipline. So if I think about security, you know, I'm you know, very comfortable with somebody having a completely different background, and then at some point, you know, they've decided that they are really interested in this space. And then absolutely, invest heavily in knowledge and invest heavily, show commitment that, you're retraining for the right reasons and what you're doing about retraining, et cetera. And, you'll probably end up, some people will end up being better than others who've sort of studied this their entire life. So I think non-linear is where we're at. As long as, you make that choice, you decide to train hard at whatever point it is, whatever juncture, and then you apply that with passion. And if you have the right passion, frankly, you can take you anywhere.
Plus one on that. I don't think I have anything to add.
Was asking about our poster child, right? Not poster child, sorry, wrong word. Our superhero and amazing Petra, who's exactly that, right? And she's, it's so perfect, this case study, that actually the team actually asked me if I had planted her because it almost sounded too perfect. But we wanted to recruit some interns, and I basically went out there and says, I want to hire some interns. Here's the rules of engagement. You need to create a presentation about yourself and the worldly map. And Petra just, absolutely delivered that. And she comes from medicine, right? She basically is trained doctor, moving to cybersecurity, still getting a degree. But, she's one of the best cybersecurity professionals I've met, right? And I think she represents that, right? And I always felt that we don't have a skills gap problem. We have a skills transfer problem. And the only thing I would say is that, any company that today actually looks at, for example, that part of the CV, I would almost argue you don't want to work for them, right? That immediately already tells you where that company is thinking. And I actually feel that this is where there's some great comments from Simon Worley about, where are we going next? I highly recommend it to view, is that we're not going to go back to this whole office-driven environment where you have to go 9 to 5 to a place to actually work, right? I think we're really looking at the hybrid model, and we're really looking at this model of the talent should live where they want to live. The talent should be where they are better to be productive, close to their family, traveling around the world if they need to. This idea that you need to commute, every day to work, I think is really going out the window. And the simple reason is the talent pool. The simple reason is the amount of talent that you're able to get, even from a cybersecurity point of view, on this case, is going to be insane. Because when you think about it, at the moment, we almost rely on a magical combination of events of somebody that happens to live close by to your office, that happens to be available, that actually can do that. And actually means our talent pool, when we're hiring for something, is much lower. So I really feel that, we need to embrace this diversity and actually bring all this talent from all these different areas, because it will make our industry much richer and actually much more effective. And there's a great presentation from Brett Victor. If you haven't seen this guy, Brett Victor, watch everything the guy creates. But the guy does an amazing presentation where he basically pretends to be an IBM engineer from 1970 or 1975, and he's talking about the future of computing. And it will actually make you cry to see how much we haven't evolved, right? But one of the things that he talks about is that the first generation of computer science was created by poets, by engineers, by doctors, by all sorts of ways of life, because that's what existed, right? We didn't have computer engineering, right? So, and not to say that computer engineering is not a good path, but I feel that, like Danny was saying, is that when we can bring all that sort of interesting intersection in life to our industry, we actually get much better professionals, and we get much better teams and much more balanced teams, and we actually deliver a lot more. So I feel that it's very important to embrace that.
Yeah, I just wanted to say I really appreciate your replies, Danny and Dinis both. I think there's many people out there similar to me who want to change their paths, and like Danny said, passion is a really important thing, and it's really great when someone can appreciate that. So I'm probably gonna steal your words from today and quote them and put them out on social media so that you could serve as an example, because if you're looking for talent, as you said, and you don't want to exclude some people just because they might come from a different background. So yeah, I really appreciate your answer, Danny and Dinis, and yeah, I'm gonna quote you on that.
Oh, it's recorded, so it's on record.
Yeah, I'll spread the video around.
But it also shows that we should be reaching out, right? Like, you should be reaching out to universities, you should be reaching out to these, to the individuals who are making the transition. And we need them. Like we need we desperately need in cybersecurity, for example, a new generation, a new wave of thinking that will, drive the change forward. Because cybersecurity is not going to go anywhere because we're barely solving the problem, right? And actually, Ante and Kevin are, it's a bit of a biased problem here because they both represent, very innovative and very creative and very effective companies. Within the CISO circles, it's still very frustrating and how some companies are not taking the same approach. And I actually feel that security can help drive the way, because it's the same way that with COVID, right? You can't wave your hand and wishful thinking and play politics, right? And hope it goes away. Cybersecurity is the same thing, right? It's not going to go away. We're shipping more and more products. The business model of the criminals is getting better and better and better. And we really need to step up our game and create resilient companies, right? And create companies that can sustain the next wave of cyber exploitation, or else, in society, the cost of digital gets bigger than sometimes the benefit, which is a problem.
I was just going to, I mean, completely agree. I was going to ask you how, Ante and Dinis, kind of your view on the rise of virtual companies, and as a result of everything that's going on right now, many in our sector, it's not like we're rushing back to office environments, and I'm sort of torn on this because, on the one hand, I feel that 10 or 11 weeks worth of the experience that we've had isn't going to change, kind of what's in our DNA. We are social, we thrive more when we're together, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality is that we're doing that today, and we're all being able to achieve that by looking at a screen. But yeah, do you guys see the sort of a massive growth in companies that from day one just choose to be virtual?
No.
Interesting.
No, I'm seeing more and more people talking about it, but I don't see that many companies actually, I wouldn't say being that brave and just deciding to. I think there's still a lot of unknowns. So I think that there's always that fear that you're going to lose that cultural bit when you have people that are not sitting in the same room, not spending time together. So I think it's definitely an interesting topic. I think that things will change, and at the end of all this, one thing is certain: things will not be the same. Now, how it will change, I don't think there's going to be like tons of companies going remotely day one, but I do think that people and businesses will try to reinvent the office spaces and try to create some sort of hybrid models where you're going to, I don't know, go to the office to do certain things, but won't be obliged to, or it won't be mandatory for you to spend majority of your time there. Or I think it's going to be rather a combination of those things than fully remotely. And I think there's one interesting thing here that I think most people will agree with. There's these big companies that always drive certain trends, like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple. Like they have a lot of resources and they do some interesting researches. And I think only Google did, like, from Aristotle to like tons of researchers of comparing productivity and sort of team effectiveness, efficiency, the dependability in different circumstances, remotely, in a squad room, open plan space, whatever. So I think it's really going to depend on them as well, because they're quite influential, and there's a whole kind of like that they create this whole domino effect where if Apple says we're going to experiment this, you're going to get a lot of tech companies trying to do something similar. It's just the way it is, right? So I think there's one thing, and from what I know, none of these big sort of influential companies have said anything like that. I think Twitter is going to go remote, right? And few others, but from big like sort of industry leaders, I don't think there was a single business that said, yeah, we're going to definitely go 100% remote from day one. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this will evolve, because it definitely will evolve, but what's going to wait for us on the other side of it, it's still up to see. I guess we all have the same crystal ball, so we don't know. But yeah, if I would have to guess, I would say yeah, there's not going to be like a huge change straight away from loads of companies like working remotely 100%, but definitely more experimentation with different models and smaller office spaces. I don't know, more of a hybrid model, as I said.
No, I completely agree. So and it is also by personal experience, but also what I've observed is that the human interaction is very important, right? I don't think you can count it out, right? So I think 100% remote, no. I think that would be very hard. I think there's definitely a number of visual clues. There's a number of human connections that you make when you meet somebody, face to face, and you interact and you see the values, you see how it works, right? You read the body signals, you understand their value system, etc. But what I think you get is a much better merge of both, right? I think you get a much better merge of, so I saw this really, and I think it was one of the big companies, tech companies. I don't think it was Twitter, but it was one of those big kind of companies that was already talking about this idea that instead of having offices, they want to have lots of offsites around the world. Right. So the logic would be that, like, for example, I still think that most companies miss a trick with Center Parcs, right, where we have the summit. It's a brilliant location. It doesn't cost a lot. I always felt that it's insane why companies don't do more offsites where you get your 100, 200, even 1,000 engineers in one place for 1 week or 2 weeks, and you probably get a lot more done during that period, and then you go into your deep work right across the board. Because the other thing that I found, and also it's very interesting because in security you see this. So, for example, I haven't met actually probably Ante physically, probably in 6 months or a year, 2 years, but I don't feel that we die off, right? I feel that we continue the previous conversation. So what I found is that once you have a human interaction in your brain, there's a set of mental models that as long as you keep topping it up with consistent communication, it doesn't feel that I've been far away from that person. If you never heard from a person or somebody, when you meet them in 6 months from now, it feels like, hey, what's going on? What's the status? But if you have a constant, update on an interaction, I actually feel that the human element, you can do it in bits. So if you look from an office point of view, and then if you look at that idea that, we should be doing short-term 2-week deliveries, then monthly and quarter deliveries, I can see companies that come together in bursts of energy. They sort of really align themselves. They really talk about the things. They have really productive meetings because, to be fair, most office is highly inefficient, right? Which is kind of what we're finding, right? We're finding that you can do a lot more deep work at home than, not everybody, but a lot of people can do deep work at home than in the office. So I think that, that architecture, okay, cool, Tony just popped in, because I think that, for example, some of the models that Tony was talking about and the cell structure and how you create these dynamic teams, I think they work really well for almost like a swarm kind of activity where, individuals and teams go on and do their own things, and then they kind of come together. Which, by the way, I've heard this, but I got a good friend at AWS who told me that, this is how they operate, right? They go in bazillions of directions, and every 6 months they come together to the big conference, and everybody meets and everybody aligns themselves. And then they have the roadmap for the next, 6 months. And it scales, right? And if every one of those teams is small and independent and can get on with it, you get a huge amount of acceleration. Tony, you want to chip in?
Yeah, on the AWS one, for certain, they have 2 conferences a year.
Yeah.
The one that everyone knows and loves, reInvent, and then they have one 6 months different, which is just an internal one, which is almost as big. But yeah, I guess it all depends really. So on people's working patterns and what the needs of the business to be co-located do or don't need. Some, high performing teams need to be co-located together, others don't. I'm aware of various organizations that are 100% remote with people with their staff dotted all over the place, and others that like to be co-located together as part of a sort of almost social unit. Personally, I like a bit of both. So even before the lockdown, I worked from home 2 days a week. But I quite enjoyed the other days where I went into the office, because it was a case of being able to network with people and do side conversations, as it were, which you can still do. I mean, now I would say I have like literally back-to-back team meetings on Teams. Whereas before actually going into the office, when there was a bit of break between stuff, because you had to get between offices or meeting rooms, or you could wander off to the coffee shop downstairs with somebody for a side chat. So it's a little bit more personal. So I think it is a combination of the two. I know certainly for the organisation I currently work for, EY, they don't envisage at the moment going back, not for quite a while, to the office, and certainly even then it will be on a almost part-time basis. So I don't think they envisage more than 25% occupancy.
That's a major shift.
Yeah. Well, to be honest, we were all hot desk people anyway. So for us, literally, when they said, "Oh, work from home," it was no major issue.
And actually,
the only thing we did do was get rid.
Yeah. So Luke just made a good point on the call, which is also, there is also a social element. Actually, like you mentioned, Tony, that I think there's a social element that for a number of individuals and teams, they do actually thrive in a group, in a social group. But I think that then is where you use horses for courses, right? You start to do that on cases where you make lots of sense, and on clusters where you have that, where the default that we had before was everything's in office. And by the way, Simon Worley, I'm sure I read about the $1 billion Lambda function, right? Which is basically, this Lambda function, this AWS system that becomes so profitable and so effective that all you got is this. And in technology, you actually had massive companies with very, very small workforces just because they scaled quite spectacularly.
Yeah. WhatsApp being another example. I think the other thing for me is that hopefully companies are also going to base a lot of their decisions going forward on the learnings that their employees are going to be delivering back to them over the next few weeks, because a lot of people will have changed their mind on the positives, the negatives on remote working. There'll be a lot of pluses which they'll be feeding back, and then there'll be a number of challenges. And I think that informed decisions on the back of the feedback we're accumulating over this sort of brutal period that we've had over the last 3 months, plus let's say the next, to your point, Tony, whether it's 6-9 months where you have a staggered work approach or whatever it is, there will be a lot there to be able to distill, and then rather than sort of trying to come up now and project what's going to happen, I think hopefully it'll be a result of those learnings. By the way, I'm going to have to shoot. I'm going to have to join another call in 5 minutes. I apologize if I suddenly disappear.
Yeah, I'll have to drop off as well in 5 minutes.
Yeah, no, it's cool that we can wrap it up in 5 minutes. Maybe just one final question that I think also Danny mentioned on the keynote, which is the geopolitical awareness. Do you find, and actually Tony, I love the shirt, Tony, there. Do you find, Ante and Tony, that you are, because of the visibility of what you see, because of the data points that you get from a security point of view, you're able to have senior conversations with exec about geopolitical awareness of what's coming, the threats, and what you're seeing in reality. That if you were not a CISO, if you didn't have access to that data set, you would not be able to have that seat at the table.
I think it helps, certainly. One of the things I get asked a lot, especially at the moment with some of my transglobal clients, is what's the current live threats out there? So being able to pull in threat intelligence that's real world, and that may potentially affect those organizations is definitely of interest at a senior level.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think there are more and more sort of frequent questions around how does the overall geopolitical situation impact our threat profile, in example. And yeah, there's more and more correlation between these things than it used to be in the past, I would say. So it does help to go back to sort of ensuring there are the right conversations that we're having at the right time. I think it does definitely help to answer your question, Dinis.
I think it also tends to be on how the organization, where it has operations, if it has operations in multiple jurisdictions and multiple countries and around the globe. Yeah. Obviously, if they're just located in one country, then they're sensitive to that location and maybe sensitive to where their clients are. But if they're transglobal, then they're going to be sensitive to general geopolitical issues around the world.
Yeah, and I think it helps because everyone's more or less aware of geopolitical sort of situations. So it really helps to drive the conversation. If you go in and talk about TTPs and threat actors, it's a bit more difficult to get sort of that traction and have these conversations as part of in the regular cadence or something. So yeah, my answer is yeah, it definitely helps. But I think sometimes you can't really get that correlation straight. So you do need to invest some time into it. And as Tony was saying, like just collecting the relevant threat intel for your specific threat profile for your industry is really, really important, and being able to find the right feeds and right sources for that.
Cool. Well, I think we can wrap it on that one. Well, thanks everybody for your time. I think this was a really great session for the summit, and that's it.
Dinis, can we do some recap for all the session? Just this 3 minutes ending.
Yeah, I can do that. So we can end it now. You guys are good to go if you need to. We'll just do a final wrap up.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
And can you please? There was one.
Thank you very much, guys.
Cheers.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank you for a great session.
Thank you. There was one question that we didn't answer from participants. How does the panel think they should measure the success of a CSO? Might be Dinis, you can just give 1-2 sentences for that.
Yeah, well, I think it depends on the board, right? I think well, if I'm being politically correct, it depends if you have a CISO that they view as the job not being hacked, so then that's how they view it. Or if you have a CISO that is supposed to be driving transformation. So I think, and I guess fundamentally, and one thing I tell my CISO, kind of peers, is that if you worry about your job in your role, you haven't done a good security awareness upwards, right? So the only time I think a CISO should be fired is if the CISO is saying, hey, everything's cool, nothing to see here, right? And then something major happens in that area, right? Then yes, because you should have made the execs aware of what's going on, not from a fear point of view, but to say, look, this is where we are on the organization, this is where we're tackling, and here are the risks that we face. Now, some of it, depends on, not being in the wrong place, in the wrong time, and not have attackers. But a lot of it is how you react, right? I find that the biggest thing you can do from a CISO point of view is have a really good ability to respond, because in today's days, you can't protect everything. You can't, the business is accelerating at wide speed. So the better you can responding at it, the better you have. So I think the CISO, going to the question, where you get an opportunity to redefine in a bit your success criteria. So you should use that ability, right? You get to say, here's what I want to do. Here's how I should be measured. And, again, make sure that aligns kind of with their understanding of it. But that's how you should be measured. If you deliver on that, great. If you don't, then, you're not doing a good job. Tony, you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd add to that what needs to be reported is very much dependent on the board and the organization's culture. The board will have stuff that they want to be reported on. They will have a direction that they're interested in, and they will, as a CISO, you should just, discuss that with them and ensure that's what they're getting. Then you've got these subtext of what the board is actually interested in, or what their priorities are. That can be actually slightly different. So that really will boil down to what the board's priorities in the business are. So if their priorities are ensuring that they meet any regulatory requirements and they don't really care about security, then they're only going to be interested in the stats and KPIs and reporting elements that are relevant to that. Anything else is just noise to them. Now you can spend time trying to educate them on that, but that's just a case then of understanding, getting a feel for those people on the board.
Yeah, I agree with that. Look, the way I do this and the way I keep sanity, and my strategy has always been that I align myself with what I generally believe is in the right interests for the company and for the organization I'm working on. Even when sometimes the organization doesn't fully understand that, I always have in the back of my head that especially the CEO is quite important, because fundamentally that's the one, or the board, right? But CEO also tends to be the one that fundamentally is the highest or element. And I always think, can I defend this to that person? And can I defend these activities from the point of view of what I believe is the best thing for the company. And and that's how I view, right? And there's times where if you push it too far, or if you don't align yourself with the organization, the right way is to leave, right? It's okay, right? Every insecurity, there's always a line that you as a CISO should be able to say, I'm not crossing that line, right? Because fundamentally, the CISO, the execs and the CEOs and the board are the ones making the decision. So they can buy all the risks, they can do everything they want, because fundamentally it's their decision. They're the ones accountable. I think as a CISO, part of your job is to make sure that you understand that direction and you protect that direction the best you can. In fact, I had a great analogy to say CISO role is that the business wants to ski down a mountain, right? Actually, it wants 20 people to ski down a mountain. Your job is to make sure that they can do it in the most efficient and safe way. So for example, if somebody can ski very well, you can send them on a very good path that maybe has some cliffs on it. If somebody can't ski, you send them down the what's it called? The black, not the black one, sorry, the red, the blue lane, because, with massive padding on the side, because they can't ski very well. So it's about that model.
Dennis, may I ask one last question?
Yeah.
So, we were talking about resourcing earlier, and to be honest, I went to university. I did computer communications engineering for years, and then I did my master's degree in security. But the thing is, when it comes to hiring, I mean, it's different. I've been bitten in the past by hiring someone when I saw his CV and like, this guy is going to replace everyone in this company, and after a couple of weeks we're like surprised, like with his skill and stuff like that. So I just want to ask you one question: when would you hire someone with a degree? When would you need someone with a degree to join you? Is it on a PhD level, let's say, when we need someone with a title? I don't know, but I just want to ask.
So I don't have any data points to that tells me that somebody with a degree is better.
Yeah.
To be fair, like a degree does show a level of commitment, right? It does show an ability to execute. Like, put it this way, right? Having lots of security certs, it's okay as long as that person doesn't believe that the certs make them good, right? So if somebody, you talk to somebody and say, hey, it's great you have 10 certs, what do you think of them? If that person has a good awareness of the gaps and the game that he plays, and actually that in some place it does help, or if they added to this, hey, I want to learn more, and that seemed like a great way to learn, then I have lots of respect, right? Somebody who has a degree on one area, for me, shows that they have executed it, right? It's great, right? And it's a career path. Not to say, and I'm not saying that having a degree is bad, right? I'm just saying that should not be the most important thing, right? That you should look for.
You shouldn't hire someone just because of their degree.
No, I would never do that, right? In fact, and this is where I highly recommend, people to take a look at, that CV that Petra created, or if you want to look at my CV, right? The way I created it, right? Is that, I cannot read a 5-page document, right? About somebody, right? It's just, you can't process it. And especially because half of it can be made up, right? Or not being something that, you directly involved. If you can distill that to something that is consumable and you show me your life experiences, I'll respect a lot more, right? So when, for example, Petra says that, she was part of a volleyball team, that for me was very important because it shows teamwork, it shows execution, right? It shows that she has a discipline to practice that. If you were captain of X, or if you were actively involved in this, or if you do community service, or if your other interests outside work sometimes tell a lot more about your values and about what you are as a professional than whatever happened to be your career path on the way. So I think degrees are one thing, but they should never be the most important thing.
Yeah. Thank you very much. That was, that was the case. Like, I remember a couple of years ago when I used to work for one large ISP in the city, they said, if you want to jump on this job, you need to have a degree. And I was like, why? They had the guy who had all the skills, but they didn't want to give it to him because he didn't have a degree. No joke. So yeah, I agree. Thank you.
There's probably some industries that, again, the degree is a good barrier of entry, like probably medicine,
yeah,
maybe lawyers, and to be fair, in IT we are very cavalier with our skill sets, but I think especially again especially in technology, especially that, first of all, I would much value a degree in engineering or an education in engineering, then I would value the education in technology, because I think that, when that path of engineering sometimes, gives you a much wider thinking. And I don't think that the way we teach technology and the way we do computer science is very effective, for example. And Gemma, since you're on the line still, you did ask a very good question, although, security culture, does it fit within InfoSec or learning and development? And I was trying to find a good way to do that, although I know their answer would be that it's part of the company, right? And they already have that. They already work for companies where, learning and the whole culture of training is deep down embedded across, from the top down. But I think that is almost a cultural thing that has to come from the company.
So your opinion is company-wide, not within a specific department?
Well, I think the specific departments should drive it, right? But it's very hard, as we experience, right? When the security team, for example, does have that culture, does want to push it out, and the rest of the organizations doesn't fully embrace it. Which actually, look, that, that 25% is very important, right? And the reason why that 25% of every team is very important is because if you don't buffer the teams with a certain amount of time that they have for non-functional requirements, there's a lot of things, even training, that doesn't happen because there's no time. Because every time you come with a requirement, you're fighting against the 100% of allocation, and they already have a massive backlog. So then you're arguing that your thing is more important than the stuff they're doing now and the stuff they have on the backlog. So to have a place, and they are future driven, they all stuff that a customer wants or there's a very specific requirement. So you want to have an environment where when you want to push training and learning and education, for example, you have already space for it. You want to push security practices, you have space. And training and education is fundamental, right? If you don't, in security, we do a very bad job at communications, right? It's super critical that we communicate, the stuff we do. Like, Abbas, runs our IT, right? The stuff that we do, and security too, right? The stuff that we do from a security awareness it makes a massive difference. You can have a great solution if you can't explain it in a way that your users understand it. And if you can bring your users on board with what you're trying to do, you're going to be very ineffective.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. So what do you want to do? So I need to do a wrap up.
Yes. Up to 5 minutes.
I can't remember half of what we spoke. Well, actually,
thank you, everyone.
Cool. Let me do what actually, one of the sessions did, which is almost like a little clip that talks about what we did, which I think is more interesting. Right. Okay. So we just had a really great session at Open Security Summit with CEOs and Cisos Roundtable. We covered a whole number of topics from security culture, secure organization, risk analysis, and I recommend you to come and hear this because it shows that there is still quite a lot of thinking that we're still doing in our industry that we haven't figured out all the answers. But also, like when you look at companies like Skyscanner and Just Eat, they already are great examples of companies who have embedded security into their practices, and they're driving a huge amount of positive change in a business by acting as enablers and being able to use visibility, gamification, and understanding of what the developer teams are doing to then be able to present that at board level, and then drives change. And then we have some good views also from Danny, which is the CEO of Glasswall, where he shared how he thinks about security, some of the areas of his concern, and that's it. And thank you.
Thank you. So I will